Hello everyone, and welcome to my second red, because that's the beginning of the rainbow, LGBTAQ2, two-souled, questioning and queer and plus video here. Oh, and okay, so this is just a continuation of the last video, and so it turns out that I actually completely ran out of this color. So whatever color I initially painted this picture in, I know that I combined several colors together to create it, and then I ended up running out of it entirely, so I tried watering it down. It didn't work. And then I went ahead and, as you can see here, I just gave up. I gave up and got up. I gave up and just decided to take my, what is that, Magellan or Magello Mission Gold watercolors, the magenta or the opera magenta, whatever color that is, and use that and just squirt that into my palette and use that instead. And then obviously, as as I showed here, when I opened it up to use it, it turns out that it was hardened in there. It was hardened all over the edges of the mouth of the tube, and I had to, really press on it hard to get the paint out, and then there was too much paint coming out and I couldn't stop it. And so that wasn't so great. And also, if you're a watercolorist, usually the tubes are very, very tiny. And usually the tubes that come in these sets are actually trials. They're small tubes, so they're actually made as a trial so that you can try out all the colors that this company produces. So the tubes are going to be especially small, and the mouth openings are going to be even smaller. And I found out that the best thing to do is to literally just get a pack of toothpicks, literally just toothpicks, and use those to dig out the last bits of paint that are left in the mouth, and that would usually end up squirting out when you twist the cap back on. The majority of these watercolor paints are twist-on caps, and in order to, you got to twist the cap back on, but if you got paint coming out of it, that paint will actually dry and harden, and it will glue down. Just about as bad as acrylic paint. It will glue down that cap so that you cannot get that paint tube open again. And depending upon the type of, if you have permanent watercolors, because permanent watercolors do exist, then you're not going to get that cap off. It's going to be the exact same as acrylic paint. And you're actually going to have to, either pierce the tube or just cut the tube open in order to get to the rest of the paint. And, just because especially with watercolors, unless they're permanent watercolors you cannot reactivate. But if they're not permanent watercolors, then they can be reactivated with water. And just because the tube has dried out, or usually just because the cap has dried onto the top of the watercolor tube, that does not mean that the rest of the watercolor in the tube is not still liquid, or at least, gelatin-like, semi-wet or whatever. More often than not, the rest of the paint in the tube is going to be still wet. It's still going to be liquid, whatever you want to call it, liquid, gelatin, whatever. It's still going to be very much mobile and not hardened to any degree. And that can actually be good for archival purposes, because if you want to pack away a tube and still have it be wet and good 10 to 15 years later, I found out that the best thing, even with acrylic paint, the best thing to do is to actually put a little bit of paint, from the tube on that cap and have the cap seal down tight. And the rest of the paint in that tube will still be wet. It'll still be wet and fresh and just as new as if you had just bought it from the store. Granted, you end up having to ruin that tube and actually cut it open, usually from the bottom. You can always cut off the top, but you usually end up having to cut off, the bottom is what I do, or even the top, just to be able to access that paint later on. Some of the watercolors you can try soaking it. You can even try soaking it in, and I would suggest 90% rubbing alcohol just to try to really eat away at whatever paint is in there. But you also have to really get a toothpick in under that cap, and water under that cap, and the rubbing alcohol under that cap to try to start eating away at the paint. You can try that with acrylic. It hasn't worked with acrylic with me. It hasn't worked with acrylic because usually when acrylic hardens, it's done. It's done. Don't, cut the tube open. You're not going to get it open. But watercolors, if you really work on it hard enough and long enough, it's going to be like a 2 to 3 day working on it, and you're just going to be constantly going back to it. It's going to be awful. Some of the watercolor tubes you can get the cap open, even if it is permanent. And the paint in there will be, still perfectly wet, as though you just bought it from the store. So there's that little bit of information for this video, and obviously I'm painting here. I'm just to actually have anything to do with this video, just to have this voiceover to have anything to do with the video, other than the initial beginning part. I am painting this, and obviously I had tried to erase the paint that had spilled into the main subject by this point, and I think I actually started this part of it like the very next year. So yeah, I did the first initial wash, the background wash, 1 year, and then I started trying to actually paint it, I don't know, like the very next year, I think it was, maybe even 2 years later. So, and now here I am about, 4 or 5 years later, actually trying to edit these videos up, post them fully, and finish the artwork all at once. So I am slightly stressed, but at least I'm trying it. So there's another tip for all of you watercolorists and artists out there. What you can do with a hardened paint tube. There you go. Bye.